A mother writes to me and says, "Today my son punched his sister. I immediately addressed it, but he whined and complained and didn't learn anything." So slow down your brain and pay attention. In the past, you have said to me, quote, I looked it up, "Every time I do exactly what you suggest, it works," end quote, referring to your kids. So think about the corollary of that. If you do what is suggested, by the way, what I suggest is not whimsical, it's just principles. So if you act according to the principles of parenting, it works, then when your son isn't behaving well, it's a pretty strong indication that the problem isn't your son, that you are not doing what has been suggested, whether by me or in the parenting book or wherever. And you and I have gone through this before, where he's been behaving badly, and I ask you more and more questions, and it turns out, well, you've been doing what was suggested half the time, which for a kid is like playing the slots. I mean, it's a gamble that he's willing to take. When you're consistent, your son enjoys the order of it. He enjoys the order that comes from law, the predictability of it, and he tends to comply with direction. When you're not consistent, he feels lost, confused, afraid. He's just a little kid, and he lives in a world where, emotionally speaking, gravity works some of the time, and some of the times it doesn't. So he rolls a ball off the table, and the ball flies in the air instead of falling to the ground. That would be confusing to a kid. They don't like it, and we're the ones that confuse them. We're the ones that turn gravity on and off, emotionally speaking. So then he becomes afraid. He starts protecting himself, and to you, that looks uncooperative. The person who's the problem is actually you, not him. He's protecting himself. I've seen this over and over. If you are loving and consistent, children listen. Why? Because if you're loving, you give them a reason to listen. Why should they listen to somebody who doesn't show an interest in them? And if you're consistent, what you're speaking or what you're doing is in harmony with law, eternal law. And after a while, kids learn what is true and what isn't. Prior to that, they actually have kind of an instinct about it. So if you're not loving, they're not going to listen to you because you're saying, I don't love you. If you're not consistent, they're not going to listen to you because they're going, you don't know what you're talking about. So if they behave badly, look for what you haven't been doing consistently, for how you haven't been loving, instead of being frustrated by them. Wow. This is a big principle for parents. New subject. I know a woman who has been practicing real love for several years. Her husband has steadfastly, diligently, religiously, one might say, refused to practice real love. And in fact has worked at arguing, changing absolutely nothing about himself, and being dismissive of anything having to do with their marriage. He's happy with the way his marriage is, so if she brings anything up, he just goes, go away, quit bothering me. Well, she really worked at it. She finally decided to at least approach one subject that had been a source of contention for a long time: money. The way she did it was pretty good. So I offer it here as a possible example for couples who have trouble with money. And it would also apply to people who are not couples, because as usual, it involves eternal principles. But this is pretty good. She says to her husband, Rob, I'm going to talk to you about something that you need to hear and that I need to say. You need to listen carefully. Now, I know that could sound just a little bossy, but not really. If you really need whatever for dinner tonight, peeled grapefruit wedges, then you get to say to your partner, as long as you're going to the store, I really need some grapefruit wedges. That's okay. You get to say the same thing emotionally. You need to listen carefully, and you need to not interrupt. She's saying that because he interrupts everything she says. She says, when I'm done, I will say, I'm finished. And now I need you to respond. And I will tell you how long you have to respond. In minutes. This is still her speaking. Again, that could sound controlling, but this is her speaking still. But every time I try to talk to you about this subject, it is a nightmare. Every time. You interrupt me, you take over. Your responses take an hour when I got to speak for 30 seconds. So just for fun and for the possibility of our doing something differently, I'm going to speak till I'm done. I'm going to tell you when I'm done. I'm going to tell you how long you have to respond, because we're going to see if this works. We got nothing to lose. The way we've been doing it so far has never worked one time. So we're going to do this differently. Purely because I'm asking. That's all. Doesn't even matter if you understand why. We're just going to. You are always right when we talk. You never listen to a single word I say. You just tell me how you're right. And you complain that you never have enough money. Even though I took a job, which I hadn't had years ago, so that we would have enough money. And you don't consider the fact that I'm working at all. All we talk about is what you want, even though I'm now working to supply your wants. The bottom line is that we're not partners when it comes to money. And I require, and I get to require a partnership. So you have a choice to make. You can either begin to behave like a partner, not just in money, but in everything. But we're going to start with money. You can behave like a partner, or I will leave. Now, parenthetically, to everybody else who's listening, she took to heart what I've said many times. When you have three choices with your partner. You can live with it and like it. She decided she couldn't live with being absolutely disregarded every time she spoke. You can live with it and hate it. Well, she's a considerable experience with that, and that never works. Or you can leave. So she's saying, you can listen to what I'm saying so that we could both learn to live with it and like it, or I will leave because I need a partner. And each person gets to determine whether they want a partner or not. Some people really don't care if they have a partner, like this woman's husband. This woman's husband actually doesn't want a partner. What he wants is a servant. And she wants a partner. Well, that's a pretty clear non-fit. So she's trying to make this work. She's not just coming up out of the blue and going, well, I'm leaving you. No, she's giving him a chance to be partner. She said, I won't live like a servant here with you anymore while pretending that we're partners. Now, how are we not partners? Your discretionary income is the money that, free money, the money that you spend on yourself after you paid your utilities and your mortgage and your car payment and blah, blah, blah. The money you spend on yourself just for fun. Your discretionary income, she's saying to her husband, is much higher than mine. And when she told me the figures, it was roughly 20 times higher. So that would be much higher. Much higher. More about that in a minute. You speak to me condescendingly every time we talk about anything, but especially about money. You talk to me like I'm just a complete moron. Just today, when I asked for a meeting, you refused and said that if I really needed something, you would consider whether you would help. Consider? This is still her words. No, that's not a partnership. That makes me a servant that you would consider even having a conversation with me and would consider helping. And I won't stay in this household for another minute if you use that word, consider, or words like it again. I just won't. Another parenthesis here. Keep in mind, these two have been married for a long time, 20 plus years. She's been treated like a servant for 20 plus years and allowed it to happen. So it's not like it was done to her, but she's waking up as she is learning eternal principles and saying, you know, I don't want to be a servant. In fact, I resign. I do want to be a partner, and I want to have a partner. She said, she continues, you talk me to death. You beat me up with words. You punch me with them. You call it explaining, but it's not. If you explain something once, I got it the first time, but you keep explaining until I agree with you. And that's condescending and intimidating and convincing. You wouldn't do this with a customer in your business, or you'd have no customers, but you do it with me because, well, this is my fault. I let you get away with it. And I won't be doing that anymore. Another parenthetical comment. She has to beg him, not ask once, because he runs all of the bank accounts. I need $100. Nope, she has to ask him. Then he says he'll think about it. Then she says, I still need that $100. Well, I haven't had time to think about it. And usually has to ask him 5 or 6 times, reminiscent of her being a child, for every dollar, even though she makes an income and she contributes it to the family bank account, which of course he controls. She said, I require X dollars of discretionary income per month, money that she just spends on whatever. Now, again, I'm not telling you all this to describe a couple who's having money issues. I'm telling you this because this particular money issue is common amongst a great number of couples, where the control of the money is really disproportionate, almost always controlled by the person who makes the most money, as though somehow it were theirs, as though the other person was just a minion who did inferior tasks and therefore deserved no money. So your discretionary income is much higher than mine. You come up with every excuse in the world for what you do and spend, and I don't care about the reasons anymore. We're not going to argue about the reasons that you spend what you spend. Nope. I simply require X dollars of discretionary income per month. Now notice how smart she is. She didn't pick a discretionary income amount that was the same as his. It's still considerably less. Nope. And I strongly encourage that she not do that. You figure out what you would like for discretionary income and then say, this is what I require. As opposed to the endless arguments that they have over, why are you buying that? Why are you buying that? Why are you buying that? Why should an adult human being have to say to their partner, here are the 10 reasons outlined and double-spaced why I want to buy this thing? Makes no sense. So she said, I simply require X dollars, and if I need more, I will say something. I've heard your excuses about how your discretionary income is necessary for the business or whatever, and I'm just not going to listen to those again. I'm done with that. The bottom line is you always have the money you want to eat out, to drink every single day, drink not water, but drink alcohol, go on vacations by yourself and with your buddies. But if I want something, suddenly we're poor. And we don't have any money to spend, even though you just spent $10,000 on a vacation. So I want X dollars per month, or you can start figuring out what life will be like for you when you lose half of what you have. Now, this sounds like a threat. It sounds cruel, but did you hear my tone of voice? This is the tone of voice she's she used with him. He controls everything because he has everything he needs. It has never occurred to this incredibly selfish man what his life would be like if suddenly he had half the assets and half the money, half the income, half the everything that he presently has. His lifestyle would change considerably because he's never really factored her into anything. She continues, "From now on, I will simply tell you what I need, and then you can either behave like a partner or not. I do not have extravagant needs." Now, I know her, and she's not exaggerating, so you can't use that as an excuse. "You will stop pounding me with words. When you start repeating yourself, which you can do all day long in endless monologues with no listening on your part, that's not going to happen anymore. I will raise my hand and say, I understand what you're saying." This is, by the way, I told you in the beginning, this wasn't just going to be about money in this couple. Everybody knows a relationship where this happens. When you go on an endless monologue, I'm going to raise my hand and say, I understand. Then I'm going to indicate to you that I understand and say, you don't need to repeat it. And then you will stop. Or I can't make you stop, but you will stop, or I will leave the conversation. See how she's not controlling him? She's not telling him he has to do anything. She is controlling her choice to be a partner, and she gets to do that. So then he can choose to be a partner with her, or he can choose to live by himself and completely cater to his individual needs, which many people, I have said this to a number of couples. I've said to one person, you'll be much happier if you don't have a partner to consider, because you hate having a partner. You hate having to part with 2 cents. You hate having to adjust your schedule or your needs to your partner ever. So I actually think you'd be happier if you didn't have one. And then they get divorced and discover, wow, I really do like not having a partner. Now, of course, they do want a companion of convenience. And so what they end up doing is marrying somebody who doesn't mind being a servant, at least in the beginning. She continues, but I'm not going to stay in a relationship where you repeatedly ignore my requests, because it's not a partnership. Now, is this loving? Because all of these things she's telling him sound pretty direct, could even sound harsh, but it's actually loving. As I read it, I just went, oh, thank goodness, because these two have had endless conflicts over pick a subject. What time is it? These two could have a fight about whether it's 3:01 or 3:02. Well, now, if you use the Naval Observatory clock, then it's 3:01, and they can fight over anything. So this could sound harsh, but it's actually loving, because at least it allows one partner to be herself. It allows one person to be happy. As it is now, we have 2 unhappy people. How could that possibly be loving? So what's the loving thing? Well, let's at least pull one partner out of the water. That partner's going to be happy. And if the other partner chooses to stay unhappy, well, they get to. So it's still loving, still caring about their happiness. If they want to call misery happiness, they get to do that. If he offers nothing, she can at least preserve who she is and be as loving as possible to him, to their children, and to others. As things are now, nobody in the partnership is loving. One person is incredibly selfish, and the other person is just incredibly needy and frightened and doesn't dare do anything about it. So sometimes stating what you need as a partner is a really loving act, certainly courageous. New subject. I know a woman who has a daughter, Kristen, who believes that whining is an actual language. So we have English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, blah, 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 and whining, which is her primary language. She speaks in whine, which is how it's known by those who regard it as their primary language. I know because I've asked them. She speaks in whine, Kristen does, all day long. Every sentence, every supposed request is whining. It gets kind of old. It gets kind of old for everybody who hears it. As opposed to almost every other language, you can distinguish that whine is being spoken through a wall. You can tell by the tone of voice that people are speaking whine. And it guarantees that Kristen can never feel grateful or happy. It's impossible to be whining and grateful. You cannot do both, nor can you be happy. So I asked Mom for a single example. She said, I was eating a muffin with chocolate frosting. Sounds pretty innocent. Actually, sounds pretty pleasurable. And Kristen came over and said in a whiny voice, it's not fair that you've got your frosting, but I don't get vanilla. So remember, she's eating a muffin with chocolate frosting. Kristen comes over and whines that she doesn't have her favorite, which is vanilla, because, well, it turns out there isn't any vanilla in the house. And Mom says, sweetie, you're whining. Now, you can actually eliminate, because I'm talking to the mother and to you, everybody who's listening, you can eliminate the sweetheart part of this. Notice she said, sweetheart, you're whining. We do the sweetheart part to tenderize the truth. We do it as kind of a prelude, an introduction. Now I'm going to tell you the truth, but oh, you poor little baby. It's actually condescending. I don't want you to be offended. So maybe if I call you sweetheart, you listen to the fact that you're speaking in whine again. It gets to be kind of enabling, actually. So I would recommend you leave it out. You just say, you're whining. Or at least eventually in our house, when my kids were young, we would just go whine. Or we would say English. If a kid was whining, we'd go English. And the kid immediately knew, oh, I'm whining, and I'm never till I'm dead going to get what I'm whining for. So maybe I should try English as my primary language, at least for a moment. So you can eliminate the sweetheart part because it's enabling. And because you're begging her, in a way, sweetheart, turns out you're whining too. Sweetheart, you who offend and hurt me with every breath you take, you're begging her to listen instead of just teaching her. Your tentative and whimpering approach, the actually perfect word is simpering, but we never use that word. Your tentative and whimpering approach convinces Kristen again, as though she needed more, that she deserves to be coddled when she whines. That's why she does it. She whines so she'll get what she wants. Normally, sweetheart is a lovely word. Turns out my partner likes to be called sweetheart. Turns out I don't really terribly mind the word either. But for a whiner, it's enabling. So see, a word by itself, you don't know what it means unless you know the context in which it's used and the tone of voice with which it's used. So Kristen predictably said, when her mother said she was whining, no, I'm not. And I'm duplicating the tone fairly well. And it's easy to understand that because victims are never, ever wrong. And Mom said, no, you are. You are whining. And I told you that you're whining, so that hasn't changed. How could you change what you said to a request? Something that I had suggested to Mom before, that she stopped the kid every single time Kristen whines and say, either say it in English or make a request. Kristen actually proved that she doesn't know another language. She went, She shrugged her shoulders. Like, I don't know. Is there an English equivalent for whining? For whining, I don't have vanilla. She didn't know the English equivalent. She looked it up in the dictionary and there wasn't one. So, talking to Mom, I said, you did very well to say you are whining. That's not a question. What we do is we debate with our children. Well, but you were using this tone, and when children are whining, they love debates because it invites more whining. No, you just said you are. There's no debate. After she said, no, I'm not. Better than you used to do, way better, because you used to argue endlessly, but not quite yet what she needs. The way it happened looked like this. You said, you're whining. She said, I'm not. You said, you are. It's better than you used to do, but this is like the old schoolyard arguments. You are. No, I'm not. You are. No, I'm not. Ending eventually in yo mama. You're acting like two peers arguing over, you're stupid. No, I'm not. You're stupid. So what could you say after she says, no, I'm not? Now, this is just a refinement of the improvement you've already made. Be the parent. So when she says, no, I'm not whining, you stop everything. You're the parent. You're the loving and teaching one here. You're actually in charge. Imagine that as the parent. You say, look at me. No, because she'll look away. Whiners and victims are always darting and looking. You know why? People who are operatives in the CIA learn this. They know they're lying. People who do this know they're lying. They're uncomfortable. She will be uncomfortable. Look into my eyes. No, look right into my eyes. Stay right here looking at me. Say this very slowly until she does. And pay attention to what I'm saying. Now, everybody who's listening, including you, Mom, listen to my tone of voice. I'm not angry. I'm not annoyed. I'm not afraid. I'm not speaking in a hurry. I'm just confident. Look into my eyes and listen to what I'm saying. I am not asking you if you're whining. I'm not suggesting that you're whining. I'm not arguing with you about it. I'm telling you that you are whining. It's killing you, and I will point out when you do it. Do you see how much more effective that is than, well, you are. No, I'm not. You are. No, you just took over as the parent and delivered a message as opposed to just, yes, you are. Now you continue. Quote, this is you speaking, the mom. Now, I asked you what you could do to ask for what you want, like in this case, the icing, instead of whining and demanding. We'll wait right here. You can sit here at the table all night long if you'd like. I'm not joking, by the way. We'll get you a pillow if you want, but we're staying right here at the table because, see, victims and whiners, when they eventually lose, when they can't think of any more excuses, they tend to stomp off as though that were the conclusion of the conversation. So you're going to stay here all night if you want to, instead of sleeping in your bed. By the way, the first time you do this with a child, they don't play this game anymore because it turns out they prefer to sleep in their beds. I'll be darned. So we're going to stay right here all night if you want until you can answer that question. In other words, the question, what could you do to ask for what you want instead of whining? Now, I'll go away so that you don't feel pressured, and I'll come back in 5 minutes to see if you've thought of something. Oh, this is beautiful loving and teaching. Beautiful. This is the kind of thing a kid will never forget. I'm not kidding. In the past, Mom has always just shrugged her shoulders because the kid, remember, victims never get tired of being victims. They never run out of energy. I'm pretty sure you could hook wires up to them and power a city. They just keep right on going. ever-ready batteries. They just keep being victims. And so the people who aren't as energetic just eventually give up and go, I don't know what to do here, because victimhood is very daunting. Mom would have given up, or she would have given Kristen the answer to the question. Nope. Kristen is a victim, profound victim, and they never truly get involved. They never really solve problems. They just tell you what they don't like. I don't like this. I don't like that. I don't get vanilla frosting. I don't like it. I have to clean. I don't want to clean my room. You recognize that tone at all? They don't make genuine choices. They don't come up with solutions. They just complain. So mom is declaring what when she says you can sit here all night long until you answer that question? She's saying you will get involved other than to complain. This is brilliant loving and teaching. The eventual goal is not to control Kristen. The idea of a parent controlling a child is just distasteful. It's that Kristen will say something like this. Doesn't have to be these words. Kristen's going to stay there until she can say something like, well, I could have just asked for the chocolate frosting. Or I could have asked you to get me some vanilla frosting the next time you're at the store. Or I could have looked up online. I don't remember the age of the child, but if your child's older than 4, they can look things up online faster than you can. I could have looked up online how you make vanilla frosting. Imagine that. Imagine making something. I mean, you're kidding. Doesn't everything come in a tub or a box or have Amazon written on it? There are any number of responses. Notice there's not just one. All kinds of solutions to Kristen's terrible first world problem that she doesn't have any vanilla frosting. What are we to do? That's worse than arterial bleeding. So if Kristen refuses to cooperate, because that's a possibility, victims sometimes go, holy smokes, my whole way of being in the world is being assaulted. I'm actually going to have to function as a human being. So I refuse. What if she refuses to cooperate, gets up from the table, leaves, whatever? That happens pretty commonly. I teach parents this almost every day. You just go like this. Every child in the world, even if they've never seen it before, they know what that means. It's really odd. I've had parents do this with their children for the first time, and the kid knows what that means. And the child goes, you can't have my cell phone. They all know that expression. The second time, they got that memorized pretty much. You just hold your hand out and you say, so let me have your cell phone for the day, not for 5 minutes until you cry some tears and tell me how you're going to miss a really, really important phone call from your very bestest friend in the whole world at school. Yeah, somehow that's not going to kill them. Actually, it's going to teach them to, get their own vanilla frosting. You just go like that. And then what if the child says, well, I'm not going to give you the phone? And you go, no problem. And then you just call the provider and you turn off the phone. So now there's no phone at all. Except now it's not for 1 day, now it's for 2 days. And you say to the child, you want to keep going? Because I can count higher than 2. I can count way higher than 2. I can count to 17 to the 90th power. By the way, that's more particles than there are in the universe, if I remember. The kids catch on pretty quickly when you're not joking. Have you noticed that during this entire discussion, other than when I found it particularly funny, my tone hasn't changed. I'm not angry at the child. Every child understands that if they don't cooperate, consequences will escalate. In our family, we called it pay me now or pay me later. You can pay me now a little, or you can wait, you can pay me more, just like maintaining a car. You can do regular maintenance on your tires or change your oil or whatever, or you can replace the car engine. You choose. Children only do, listen to this, because it's an axiom of parenting. Children only do what they are rewarded for, just like trained seals. Why do you think seals get up on a little box and flap their flippers together? Because they know they're going to get a fish. Are you kidding? There's no, it turns out, survival advantage for wild seals to get up on a box and clap their flippers together. We never see this behavior in the wild. No. They do what they're rewarded for, and they do what they can get away with. And regrettably, we reward them for horrible behavior. And we let them get away with, well, whatever they want to do. It's our job to love and teach them, to teach them what works in life. And victimhood doesn't work. That's why we teach them, because it's going to ruin their lives. Do you want to ruin your child's life? Well, every parent would say no. And then they let them get away with victimhood. Yeah, you do want to ruin your child's life. You didn't realize you wanted to, but it turns out you really want to ruin your child's life. Do you want that to be on your tombstone? Fred Jones, dedicated to ruining his children's lives. No, I don't think so. That's why we're having this discussion, is to learn how to help our children be happy. New subject. We all have our own, often unique skills, gifts. We're all needed for different things and times. We all have them. And we absolutely must not doubt our worth. We have whatever gifts and abilities and skills we have. That particular combination is unique to us. And the world needs us, it turns out. They may not need us to be president of a country. Well, there's only so many people it can be. But they need us to do something. The world needs generals. The world needs privates. If you have any question about that, see what a battle would look like if all we had was generals in a tent and nobody with a rifle. The world needs popes and humble ministers who just go about caring for the poor or doing mass or giving a sermon as a minister in a Protestant service or whatever. The world needs geniuses, people who just revolutionize the planet with their ideas. And they need the men and women who mix mortar for bricks. Any doubt of that? See what the world would be like if nobody knew how to do that. It's not all that complicated to do. But it turns out it's a lot harder than it looks. And we need men and women who do that well. Or we have buildings that look, well, pretty crappy and fall down. We need people of all manner of character. Churchill is credited with, well, virtually saving England during World War II. He was a very unusual man and managed to marshal forces and people in a way that, well, saved the United Kingdom. And yet, personally, he was not a very fun guy to be around. I read one quote that said, if you knew, to know him was to hate him. He was just not a nice man. And not particularly politically savvy. But then World War II came along, and they needed somebody with his characteristics. George Patton in World War II was a pretty annoying, self-centered, egotistical, arrogant, just not a pleasant man to be around. But it turns out he knew how to move tank divisions And he moved across Europe in World War II and reached Germany in a way that probably no other general could have done. And after the war was over, he thought he was still supposed to be a warrior, so he was going to start a war with Russia, and they had to pretty much fire him, really. We all have characteristics that are useful in some times and places, and yet not in others. These two men that I mentioned, and there are many others I could give you examples of, were magnificent in battle, in war, but not a whole lot for leading in peace. Patton was worthless in peace. Churchill was almost immediately not reelected after the war was over. What am I saying? There's a price to be paid for our gifts. It's been my discovery, late in life actually, that the more gifted you are in a particular thing, the greater the price you pay for that gift. Generals can rarely make or lay brick. Bobby Fischer was probably the greatest chess player to ever live. And it turns out that was pretty much the only thing he could do. Couldn't get along with other human beings, didn't have any other skills. He played chess in his mind endlessly. In preparation for a single match with a single guy, he went through all of his recent tournament moves in chess and had 10,000 moves, consecutive moves, memorized in his head. Try that sometime. So he was really good at one thing, but wow, did he pay a price for it. How often have we thought, wow, I really wish I was skilled at blank. I know those people, not all of them, but I know a lot of people who are incredibly gifted, and they really pay for it in other ways. They may be wealthy, and they're terrible spouses and fathers. Rarely can concrete pianists pour concrete. And sometimes, in a given situation, it's concrete we need, not piano playing. Depends on the circumstance. Bottom line is, the world needs all of us. During times of change, there is always a price to be paid. And the skills that served us in one area or time might not serve us in another area or time. So even in our own lives, we may see a change in the need for particular skills or abilities. We might need help if all we have is survival skills. Some people are just masters at surviving, but they don't know anything about happy. So what does it really come down to? Learn your skills, learn your gifts, be aware of them, know what they're good for, and know that there are times when they're not as useful, and when you're going to need other skills or abilities, or you're going to need the help of other people who have entirely different ones. New subject. It's fairly common for people to beat themselves up when they make mistakes. That's just almost axiomatic. It sounds like a kind of penance, like a profound desire not to make the mistake again, but often it's not. Mostly unconsciously, people often beat themselves up over mistakes precisely so that other people don't. They'll stand up to do public speaking and they'll say, I'm just so afraid. I just really suck at public speaking. Well, they've already given themselves the worst possible evaluation, so nobody's going to come up to them afterward and say, you really do suck at public speaking, because they've already said it. If they whip themselves, maybe other people won't. But in the process, we demean our gifts. We feel small. We feel criticized by other people, even if other people didn't do it. Self-condemnation, not a useful skill. Mixing mortar, yes. Being a general. Self-condemnation, not so much. New subject. As people learn about real love, and as they feel real love and the changes that come with it, they make a lot of mistakes, unavoidable as you learn an entirely different way of living. Then they often ask why they keep making mistakes. Why can't they just keep experiencing the joy they felt in the beginning when they felt understood, accepted, and loved? This is fairly easy. Picture the past as being a planet of experiences, which has a mass and therefore a force of gravity pulling you back into it. The greater the mass, the greater the gravity. This planet of past experience, your past, is huge. Your past experiences are, by definition, much greater than the one you're having right now. This is just one. And the gravity is directly proportional to the mass, always. That's just a physical law. The more experiences you have from the past, the more impressive they were, the more impressionable you were, read that as the younger you were, then the greater the mass, and the more you feel its gravity. So the gravity of the past will constantly be sucking you back into the past, into the patterns of pain, fear, doubt, anger, feeling alone, self-loathing, feeling victimized, despair, and so on. With all physical laws, gravity never sleeps. But this gravity is also predictable. Now, this is where this becomes an advantage. There's a way out if you understand gravity. If you generate a force, in this case, love, away from the gravity of pain and fear, and if the force is great enough, love, you can escape the gravity of the past. Even though the Earth's gravity is just unbelievable, when a rocket takes off into outer space, do you know that they go from Earth's gravity to weightlessness, and they're in outer space in 8 minutes? That's all. And they've discovered, because it's a law of physics and it's also a law of emotional life, the beginning is the most difficult, because the gravity of any object, in this case the past, has a greater force on all objects, you, the closer you are to it. So standing on the surface of the Earth, gravity's pretty strong. If I'm 200 miles away from the Earth and in orbit, I'm going to feel essentially weightless. That's just 200 miles away. So what's the solution to this gravity of the past? Seems pretty obvious. The solution to the gravity of the Earth is to lift off and exert a force great enough to reach outer space. The solution to the gravity of the past is move. Move. If you sit still, gravity will claim you. And not the good kind. I mean, just today, I went out to move a rock in the backyard. A large rock that instead of one place, I wanted it in another place. And it turns out that gravity, over a period of 30 years of it sitting in the same place and having sat in mud and with each rain, the gravity of the Earth just slowly sank this rock down to the place where it required a winch to move this rock. I couldn't move it, not even with a lever, not with shovels, not with anything. If you sit still, gravity will claim you too and suck you into the mud. Not a great place to be. Instead, cling to anything that is true and loving, because it will take you away, on wings, if you like, from the death of the gravity of the past. Newton said that the force of gravity acting between any two objects is inversely proportional to the square of the separation distance between the centers of the two objects. I'm laughing. at how foreign science sounds to people who haven't done it. To people who have a scientific background, they're going, well, yeah, duh. To people who weren't trained in science, it sounds like, what? What this really means is that if two objects are 2 feet apart, picture that, and then the separation is increased to 4 feet apart. So the separation is doubled. The distance is doubled, but the gravity between them is decreased by the square of that number, 2. So it's decreased by 4. Square simply means the square of 3 is 3 times 3. The square of 4 is 4 times 4. So to square a number simply means to multiply it by itself. So if you move things 2 times further apart, then you just decrease the gravity by 4. So the further away you get, not only does the gravity get less, but it gets less faster. Let's make this practical. The diameter of the Earth is about, well, you're not going to remember this, so let's call it 8,000 miles. So if you're at the beach right now, standing at the edge, you're 4,000 miles from the center of the Earth. If you go up in the air 4,000 miles, the distance between you and the Earth increased by 2, and the gravity decreases by 4. 4 times lighter. Now, it turns out it actually feels relatively weightless because there are other forces involved, like centripetal force and so on. Forget all that. Why am I giving you a science lesson? Because it applies to your life. The further we get away from the gravity of the past, the faster you get away from its effects. It's not a one-to-one thing. Thankfully, it's the distance squared. You take 2 steps, you get 4 times less effect from the past, and so on. I mean, it's like, hooray! This idea of gravity decreasing by a square instead of just 1 by 1 is hallelujah. In other words, hang on tight in the beginning as change is happening and get through the initial changes. Because if we can get through that first and hardest part, so when a rocket lifts off from the Earth, we see that just unbelievable. It's an explosion. They have these huge tunnels beneath the rockets, and it shoots flame and smoke out for a mile. That making that first few miles of elevation of the rocket takes unbelievable thousands of gallons of fuel. But the further away from the Earth the rocket gets, the easier it gets. And once it's in orbit, you can change the orbit with just, well, frankly, a breath. I'm not kidding. If we can get through the first and hardest part, where the emotional gravity is greater, our progress gets easier and easier. More and more, we're able to replace the gravity of the past with the gravity of the present. The past has its own gravity from all those experiences, but the present begins to acquire its own, feeling loved, safe, peaceful, powerful. That has a gravity. We are greatly rewarded for our efforts to be removed from the effects of the past. We are disproportionately rewarded for our faith. I don't know that I've ever heard that phrase before. I'm going to say it again. We are disproportionately rewarded for our faith. To turn it into a math problem, if you like. We take 2 steps of faith, we move 4, or perhaps more. We take 4 steps, we actually move 16. How do we do it? We cling to the forces of good, love, peace, truth. They have a gravity, and we feel it more and more as we live according to those principles. Trust. It turns out that if you can make that initial push of trust, where gravity seems almost insurmountable, if you've never trusted, that first trusting step just seems impossible. You can get away faster and faster, easier and easier. It's the initial effort that seems nearly impossible. And that is why we tend to stop early on, right at the point where it would have gotten easier. Every addict knows this. I did it as an addict. Right at the place where it would have become easier if I didn't use just once to discover that I can survive not using it. I wasn't comfortable, so I'd use again. Well, now I'm lying face down in the mud, and it turns out it's harder to stand. I re-emphasize that we're not trying to stop the past. It's not even worth going through. We're clinging to the gravity of truth and love because they have, it turns out, infinite power. It's quite a thing to think about. We'll see you next week.